The snow fell quietly as officers bowed their heads at a funeral. But silence shattered when the K-9 broke into frantic barks, clawing at the coffin. At first, mourners thought it was grief, until the truth was revealed and what lay inside left everyone frozen in shock. Snow drifted down in heavy flakes, blanketing the cemetery in silence. Rows of officers stood shoulder to shoulder, their uniforms dark against the white ground, badges glinting faintly beneath the gray sky. The air carried the weight of grief, each breath visible in the bitter cold. At the center rested a coffin, draped in the American flag, its colors striking against the snow. Family members clutched one another, their faces pale with sorrow. A young girl reached for her mother's hand, her wide eyes fixed on the solemn scene before her. The sound of muffled sobs lingered in the frozen air. Beside the coffin sat the officer's K-9 partner, a German shepherd with watchful eyes. His ears twitched at every sound, but his gaze never strayed from the flag-draped box. Loyal even in death, the dog pressed his body close to the wood, as though refusing to let go of his fallen friend. The German shepherd had been more than just a K-9 partner. He had been family. Years of service had bound him to the fallen officer. Their bond forged in long nights of patrols, dangerous pursuits, and quiet moments of trust. Where the officer went, the dog followed, unwavering and alert, always ready to protect. Stories of their loyalty were whispered among the ranks. Fellow officers remembered how the shepherd once stood guard over his handler after a shootout, teeth bared, refusing to move until medics arrived. The bond between them wasn't written in duty reports. It was carved into every heartbeat they shared on the front lines. Now, with his partner gone, the dog's grief was visible. He pressed his head against the coffin, a soft whimper escaping his throat. Snowflakes clung to his fur, but he didn't move, didn't blink. It was as if he believed, with every ounce of his being, that his duty was not yet finished. First, mourners thought the shepherd's whimpers were only grief. But soon, his behavior shifted. He pawed at the coffin's side, claws scraping against the wood, his ears pinned back as though something inside unsettled him. Snow swirled across the burial ground, but his focus never wavered. A ripple of whispers moved through the line of officers. Some glanced uneasily at one another, while others tried to explain it away. "He's just mourning," one murmured. Yet the dog's movements grew sharper, circling, growling, then pressing his nose against the coffin with urgency. His bark shattered the solemn silence, deep and commanding, echoing across the graves. The widow stepped forward, her face pale, clutching her daughter's hand. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, eyes wide. "Why won't he stop?" she whispered. The dog barked again, pawing harder, his agitation impossible to ignore. What had begun as a funeral was shifting into something else, something strange, something no one was prepared to face. Two officers stepped forward, trying to calm the shepherd. They tugged gently at his collar, murmuring soft commands, but the dog resisted, planting his paws firmly into the snow. His growl deepened, low and guttural, sending shivers through the mourners. This wasn't the sound of grief, it was warning. The veteran handler, an older man with decades of service, narrowed his eyes. He had trained countless K-9s, and he knew the difference between sorrow and alarm. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his breath fogging in the frozen air. The others exchanged uneasy looks, unwilling to admit it aloud, yet unable to ignore the shepherd's insistence. The dog barked again, pawing furiously at the coffin, snow scattering beneath his claws. The crowd stirred, whispers rising to anxious chatter. The widow clutched her daughter close, her face pale with dread. The handler stepped forward, heart pounding. "We need to check," he said firmly. Around him, silence fell once more, but this time, it was heavy with fear. The ceremony halted in uneasy silence as the shepherd barked again, his voice echoing across the snow. Mourners shifted nervously, unsure whether to be frightened or to trust the animal's instincts. The handler stepped closer to the coffin, his gloved hand resting on the trembling dog's back. "We need to open it," he said, his tone steady but urgent. Gasps rippled through the crowd. An officer in charge frowned, shaking his head. "This is a funeral, not an investigation," he argued. But the handler didn't budge. "You don't understand. He's not grieving. He's warning us." The widow's eyes glistened with fresh tears, torn between horror and hope. She looked at the shepherd, then back at the officials. "Please," she whispered. "If he senses something, we can't ignore it." Reluctantly, the command was given. Pallbearers exchanged wary glances, their hands trembling as they reached for the coffin's lid. The snow fell heavier now, as though the world itself held its breath. The pallbearers hesitated, their hands hovering over the lid as if touching it might unleash something unspeakable. The handler gave a firm nod, and together they lifted the coffin open. The creak of the hinges cut through the hush, a sound sharper than the winter wind. All eyes leaned forward. Inside was not the still, uniformed body everyone expected. Instead, the coffin revealed an unsettling emptiness, layers of fabric hastily arranged, concealing something beneath. Gasps echoed through the mourners as one officer reached in and pulled aside the covering. What lay beneath made his face drain of color. It wasn't the officer they were burying. Tucked beneath the folds was evidence, weapons, documents, and items that hinted at a far darker story. The shepherd barked furiously, his instincts vindicated, his eyes locked on the disturbing discovery. Shock swept through the funeral like a wave. Whispers turned to cries, and the snowy silence became chaos. What had begun as mourning was now unraveling into a mystery no one had been prepared to face. The handler's voice cut through the uproar. This was never a burial, it was a cover-up. He lifted one of the documents, its pages smeared but legible. The papers spoke of corruption, evidence tied to a criminal ring that had infiltrated the very heart of the department. Someone had tried to bury the truth, quite literally, beneath the snow. Gasps rippled through the crowd of officers. Faces turned pale, some in disbelief, others in quiet shame. The widow clutched her daughter, confusion warring with grief. "Where is my husband?" she cried, her voice breaking. The question hung heavy in the frigid air. No one could answer. The shepherd barked again, a sharp sound that jolted everyone back to reality. He stood rigid, his gaze sweeping the mourners as though daring anyone to deny what had just been uncovered. The weight of betrayal settled over the gathering. It wasn't just a funeral anymore. It was the unraveling of a lie, exposed by the loyalty of a dog who refused to be silenced. The snowy cemetery, once filled with grief, now pulsed with disbelief. Officers gathered in tight clusters, whispering about betrayal and shame. The widow held her daughter close, her tears frozen on her cheeks, but her eyes glimmered with a different fire, demanding truth, demanding justice. The shepherd sat proudly before the open coffin, his chest heaving, as if he had carried the weight of revelation on his own. Within hours, investigators swarmed the scene, taking custody of the hidden evidence. The funeral became the beginning of an inquiry that would shake the department to its core. What was meant to bury a man had instead unearthed a scandal, and it was all because a dog refused to be ignored. Days later, the shepherd was honored. Standing tall, snowflakes dusting his fur, he received a medal not just for loyalty, but for courage beyond measure. The widow approached, resting her trembling hand on the dog's head. "You gave me the truth," she whispered. In that moment, everyone understood. The greatest guardian of justice had been the one who could not speak, yet had barked louder than all.